2016 was a phenomenal year for mobile gaming. It was the year when the critically acclaimed Pokemon Go was released for both Android and iOS devices, a game that sprinkled something different with how mobile games were done before. It was a new flavor added to a nostalgic piece of media that most people held dearly from their childhood. It was also the year when Final Fantasy IX was ported into mobile. A lot of big games came into mobile in 2016, but we still lacked some good RPGs that's free and is not a re-release of an old game. It was only until recently when game developers started to focus more on this genre when it comes to mobile games. There was, however, one game that would soon be released globally that many people had not anticipated.
ヘリオス、こちらハイペリオン、状況を報告せよ。報告します。
Honkai Impact is a hack and slash gacha RPG developed by miHoYo, the same company that brought us Genshin Impact last year. It is the spiritual successor to miHoYo's another game, GirlZ. Most of the characters in Honkai Impact are the same characters that you can find in GirlZ, but their stories are changed to fit the universe of Honkai Impact better. miHoYo released Honkai Impact on October 2016 in China and was soon released in Japan in February 2017, where it reached 1 million downloads. Later that year, it would be released to South Korea and to the rest of the sea countries. In March 2018, miHoYo finally released the game to North America and countries in the EU. By that time, the game has reached a total of 35 million downloads worldwide. The game was initially released for Android and iOS devices, but was later ported to the PC in December 2019. It was perhaps miHoYo's most successful game at the time, and they knew it. And they knew they need to give this game their support and carefully crafted dates for it. And so they did. Almost 5 years after the game's initial release in China, Honkai Impact is now on its version 4.6, boasting over 50 playable characters, stunning visual quality and art style for a mobile game of its age, memorable soundtrack, enjoyable gameplay that encompasses several other game genres, and a riveting storyline that spans different media. Today, we're going to talk about playing Honkai Impact in 2021. I started playing Honkai Impact when it first came out to the sea countries. However, considering I had no money to buy a decent phone, I really never enjoyed the game. After just a few hours of trying it out, I decided to uninstall it. It was just making my head hurt because clearly the game wasn't designed to be run by a phone with only just a slightly more powerful processing power than a scientific calculator. I came back next year with a much more powerful phone. By that time, there were already a lot of changes in the game, but I was more intrigued by the addition of an open world segment to what was once a dungeon instance game, as I like to call it. That's when I began to enjoy the game and progress through it, only to quit again because I got bored and I didn't have any time to play because of university. So even though I had a lot of progress in the game, I decided to abandon it again. When I decided to come back to the game again just a few months ago, I had all the time in the world. I'm unemployed, and the fact that there's this pandemic going on didn't help with my situation. My friend also said that he tried the game again since there was a collaboration event going on at the time with Neon Genesis Evangelion, and that there's a free character that you can get just by playing the game. The rest is history, because if I decided not to continue playing, I wouldn't be here making this video. I would be playing something else entirely, like, I don't know, I guess another gacha game because I'm a gambling addict. To be honest, I never really had any recollections of how Honkai Impact was during the first 2 times I tried the game. I remember some of the controls and how the game works, the general gameplay, the gacha system, the characters and whatnot. But whatever the game was like before, the game that I experienced today is really fantastic. miHoYo is really eager in releasing new updates for the game, which consequently makes it a hard topic for reviewing. Reviews of this game that you can find on YouTube are more or less obsolete, especially if it was uploaded years ago, and this review will inevitably suffer the same fate in the following years. Wiki editors also seem to have given up on updating the various wiki pages of the game. Entries of co-op raids of the game are about the mechanics that were present when the raids were first introduced in the game, but does not reflect what they actually are today. It goes the same for the Abyss, namely the Dirac Sea and the Q Singularis, where they were mentioned in one of the wiki sites of Honkai Impact 3rd as content that is no longer available. It may or may not return in the future, even though it is evident that these game modes do come back every 2 to 4 days. You can check the wiki for information about the various characters in the game and their abilities, but if you're looking for information about certain game modes, it's almost impossible to find information about the current ones that are in the game. Anyways, we're going to break the game down into 7 segments: visuals, models and soundtrack, story, characters, gameplay, gacha system, the problems with the game, and the conclusion. I will be making timestamps for each segments and their sub-segments so that if you don't like the sound of my voice, you can scroll down to the description to skip to the segment that you want to know about. But before we proceed, I would just like to say that if you've never tried the game before and thinking of downloading it, I highly recommend that you do so. You won't regret it, especially if you're already familiar with gacha games or you're a fan of hack and slash games. You don't need the prestige limited time gacha characters to progress through the game, and the free characters and weapons that you can get by just playing the game are more than enough to do all the game's content. Of course, it will just take more time. If you decided you want to know more about the game, then sit back and relax, because this is going to be a long video. The visual look of Honkai Impact 3rd isn't anything outstanding in today's standard. Not to mention the fact that miHoYo released Genshin Impact just a few months ago that looks really gorgeous and can compete with console titles when it comes to its graphical presentation. But considering the game is already 5 years old, I'd say it has stood the test of time. While the environment looks really bleak and simple, dull even, I'd say it's just a perfect balance of visual quality and software performance so that the game won't require high-end phones and will work more or less on cheaper ones. Character models are decent since the game runs on the Unity engine, as all other good games out there do, like Yandere Simulator. But since every anime game seems to have the need for jiggling tits physics, this game unfortunately has it as well. It's kind of a bummer, but it's really nothing major to worry about. It's just a subjective view, it doesn't necessarily affect how the game plays out. If you like this kind of stuff in your games, then you will more than enjoy the plethora of big titty anime girls in here with jiggling tits. And since it's an anime game, you can also do this.
So trusted you. I thought I could too. So why in bloody hell does Makarov know you?
The art style for each character on the character list and the portraits of Stigmas are decent as well. If you ask me, I'll say Honkai Impact 3rd is probably one of the most anime-looking game in the Google Play Store, even if you face it against games that are based on actual anime. Attack animations and skill effects aren't obnoxiously attacking your retinas, and they also have the right balance of flashiness since the game can still show you what the hell is happening in the battleground while you're executing your fancy moves. However, there are some visual effects that can hurt your eyes as they pulsate bright colors, which can be bad for people with epileptic seizures or people that are generally sensitive to blinking lights. Enemy models are also decently designed, and you can see some distinct features between them. Mechanical units all look and feel robotic, zombies generally have pale skin and a distinct color palette, and the Honkai beasts themselves have this strange look that feels like they're made out of plastic, but at the same time not. It's really nice. Although they do suffer from some minor design problems, which we will be talking about later in this video. However, we shouldn't just be talking about the game's in-game animations. Because their animated cutscenes, oh boy, you're in for a treat. If you've been watching some anime-related stuff on YouTube, you've probably seen some ads of Honkai Impact already. Excluding some of its shitty ads, the game generally uses actual cutscenes that you can find in the game's main campaign. miHoYo's animation department is something else. The cinematic cutscenes look a little bit janky since they're like an animated CGI hybrid similar to Berserk 2016, which is infamous for its hilariously bad CGI. However, the difference is that Honkai Impact's animation is way less jarring because it leans more towards the drawn part compared to Berserk's attempt at a full-blown CGI show with a sprinkle of drawn characters. It's just amazing. And top it all off with the game's soundtracks for a full experience of a short animated film. The soundtracks for the game are composed by miHoYo's in-house music team, miHoYo, the same team that brought us Genshin Impact's wonderful soundtrack. The game features multiple soundtracks for each event, and they all fit well in the overall motif of the game. The main menu theme that the game uses can be a perfect example of what I'm describing. It's the music that's been playing in the background all this time, but let's listen to it alone. This music makes you feel safe and afloat since you are on the beach of a ship in the main hub of the game, and the music gives you this relaxed sense of security kind of vibe. And then when you start a mission and you're on the Valkyrie select screen, here is the music. It gives you the feeling of urgency and tension. You are sortying into the battlefield after all, and in a lore perspective, it is a life and death situation out there. And remember when I said Honkai Impact is one of the most anime looking game in the Play Store? Well, it doesn't just look like an anime, but it also sounds like one. You might have already heard of this before, but just listen to this.
甘い夢が思い出の中終わりまで
See what I mean? And you get to hear more amazing soundtracks throughout the game. To sum it all up, Honkai Impact 3 is still one of the more gorgeous looking game out there in the Play Store with outstanding soundtrack, and may as well be one of the best looking games in mobile gaming history. As previously mentioned, the story of Honkai Impact 3 is scattered throughout different media. The main storyline is obviously in the game, but the manhwa significantly supports it by offering lore and explanations for any questions that you may have while playing the game. I will not be mentioning any spoilers, obviously, and I will only be tackling the premise and some of the story from the first chapter of the game because I believe that the game's story is best experienced when you're going in blind. The game is set in an alternate version of Earth, plagued by catastrophes caused by Honkai, a malevolent force with a will of its own. The Honkai seems to be a cyclic phenomenon and keeps on returning to end civilization on Earth each time it gets too advanced. There are various global factions that exist that combat the power of Honkai. One of them is Schicksal, a European-based peacekeeping organization that deploys human warriors known as Valkyries to fight off the Honkai menace. Another one is the Anti-Entropy, which objected Schicksal's method of using human soldiers and instead favored the use of mechanized robots to battle the Honkai. During the events of the game, the world is uninhabitable and only a few cities remain functional. The Honkai Horde makes the places outside of cities with heavy security very dangerous. The player will initially follow 3 Valkyries in training from Saint Freya Academy, an institution founded by the early leaders of Schicksal. These students are Kiana Kaslana, May Raiden, and Bronya Zaychik. Their mission at the start of the game is to board the hostile enemy battleship Selene and control it. During the takeover process, Bronya goes berserk but got quickly subdued by Kiana and May. Following the success of this mission, the girls took a graduation exam during which a mysterious voice contacted Kiana and informed her of her lost parents. Things started to go awry after that, and thus starts the journey of these Valkyries. Even though the premise of the game is fighting off the Honkai threat, the story is more about the struggles of the characters as they fight for their lives in a desolated world. It's an internal struggle between people that fight the Honkai threat that are willing to sacrifice everything they can, and people that want to fight the Honkai in another way. In the end, the Honkai threat is just the overarching plot of the game. The main story we are after are the interactions between these various groups of people, the decisions they make, their backstory, and the effects of the Honkai outbreak on the survivors. The game also has open world game modes that offer different stories. As of making this video, there are currently 3 open world maps, one that tells the story before the current events of the game, one that retells the events of chapters 7 to 8, and one that tells the future of the current events of the game. To fully enjoy the stories, I suggest finishing the main story first until the latest chapter. By the time this video gets released, the latest chapter should be chapter 22. The lore that surrounds the game is interestingly deep and convoluted, which is always a plus for me. Throughout the game, you will be introduced to characters that you've never met before, or hint at characters that other characters know but you don't. This is where the multiple manhwa of the game enters. These manhwas will give you the context for all of what's happening in the entire game. This does not mean that the story of the game alone is not sufficient. That itself is pretty interesting already. But reading the separate media makes it even more interesting than it already is. More so because it tells the sort of characters that you've grown to love and care about. As of writing the script, there are currently 54 available playable characters. However, in reality, these playable characters aren't really characters per se, but rather they are just battle suits of the handful of characters that we will meet in the game. Some of them anyways. To explain it easier, let's take a look at Kiana. Kiana here is one of the Valkyries that you will be starting with, and is also one of the main characters in the game. And she's called White Comet. This White Comet is the name of her battlesuit. If you look at the full roster of the game, you will see a lot of other Kianas in there. Those are not alternate universe Kianas or anything, they are just different battlesuits. Again, some of them. And even though these battlesuits are essentially the same characters, they offer unique abilities that differ from one another. There are also characters that are the awakening of another one. These characters can be deployed together in missions aside from open world maps, and they share several of their skills. However, the good news here is that since these characters share several skills, upgrading a skill from either characters will automatically upgrade the skill of the other, essentially reducing the amount of coins you need to spend to upgrade their skills. These shared skills are denoted by a pink chain symbol beside their name. Some characters in the game are not playable characters. They could be characters we meet through cutscenes or characters that we fight in one of the mission nodes. These characters are mixed into the Stigma roster, which we will be talking about later in the gameplay section. These Stigmas are also designed similarly to Valkyries, as there are multiple Stigma types of the same character. This makes the NPCs in this game very unique from each other. Comparing it to miHoYo's latest game, Genshin Impact, where the NPCs that you can talk to are just generic models to populate the world, NPCs in Honkai Impact 3 have distinct appearances. To be fair, Genshin Impact is an open world and it will be near impossible to design every NPCs with distinct features, but I still like the idea miHoYo has implemented in Honkai Impact 3 where they limited the use of generic modeled NPCs. Almost all characters that are mentioned, introduced, and showed in the story have unique appearance. The only thing that uses generic models are the enemies where they look exactly the same. Speaking of which, the game also suffers from what I like to call the recolored slime syndrome, where developers recycle enemy models and change its colors to pretend that it's a different species. But it's nothing harmful. So while there are multiple playable characters available, they are mostly just the same characters but with different movesets and abilities. When it comes to Stigmas, they offer different passive skills and set bonuses. But the most important differences between these battlesuits are their types and elemental affinity. But before we dive into the core mechanics of the game, I'll mention first that the game uses an energy system because, it's both a mobile game and a gacha game. I called it energy system, but it's called stamina in game. I just didn't want you all to get confused since stamina can also be part of a game's mechanic like with Genshin Impact, where certain actions like sprinting and swimming use stamina, while the game's energy system is called resin. Stamina in Honkai Impact increases as you level up your account. We'll talk about account level later in this video. Honkai Impact 3 uses a priority system, and it's exactly what you think it is. It's just like Pokemon, but instead of elements, Honkai Impact 3 uses the following: Biologic, Mecha, and Psychic. Biologic units are weak against Mecha units are weak against Psychic units, and Psychic units are weak against Biologic units. Both enemies and your Valkyries are subjected to this priority system. Later in the game, you will be introduced to the Quantum type, which is only weak against itself. There really isn't anything special about these types. Biologic enemies tend to be squishy but boast their speed and composed of some units that can dodge your attacks. Most of these units are what they call zombies in the lore, aside from a select few. Mecha enemies are sturdier compared to biologic and mostly use mechanized arsenal to fight you. They are mostly composed of robotic units. Meanwhile, psychic enemies are your typical generic Honkai beasts that sport white exteriors sprinkled with pink outlines of energy. Quantum type enemies, on the other hand, have added gameplay mechanics. They are mostly the same enemies that you can find in the psychic group, but they're recolored black with star patterns. But not only do they look different from their psychic counterparts, they also have two distinct states called regular state and the collapse state. When these enemies are in their regular state, they are immune to any status effect, but they lose this immunity when they enter their collapse state, while also increasing the damage they take by 43%. We will come back to this later. Elements don't really have that much of a role in the priority system, but are as much important as the types. There are enemies that are resistant to or strong against certain elements. There are enemies that are totally immune to physical damage and can only be hit by elemental damage and vice versa. But while these enemies exist, they can mostly be found on special game modes outside of the story mode, and the game will tell you in advance about their resistances and weaknesses. Generally, enemies only care about your Valkyrie's types, and you only need to care about choosing the correct type against an enemy and how you would kill it. Honkai Impact 3 is a hack and slash action RPG for the majority of the time. I say majority of the time because there are some cases where you need to do some platforming. Sometimes you need to play a shmup, and other times the game transitions into a side-scroller. But other than that, Honkai Impact 3 incorporates a simplified version of the combo systems of games like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, while giving Valkyries other unique abilities. Of course, in the two aforementioned games, all the varying combos can be executed by just one character, or maybe two depending on what game you're playing. But here in Honkai Impact 3, they're scattered throughout different Valkyries. The most notable parallel that you can draw from these games are the combos that include holding the attack button after a certain number of hits, or pausing for a second before pressing the attack button again. However, there are no combos that require directional input. And I can pretty much say that they executed this type of combat system perfectly. The attack animations of all Valkyries feels fluid and strong. They feel like there's actual weight in their attacks, and the rhythm of their combos feels nuts. Top it all off with the sound and visual cues, it is really hard to miss the window of when to execute the special combos. And once you learn the special combo of a Valkyrie, you would be doing it subconsciously like how you would do with games like DMC or Bayonetta. There is no jump button for the general gameplay of Honkai Impact 3, but it does offer a dodge button which works quite similarly to Bayonetta. When you dodge an enemy attack at the exact moment it's about to hit you, you will trigger the Valkyrie's ultimate evasion skill. This skill varies from Valkyrie to Valkyrie, but most of them enters time fraction mode where enemy movements and certain projectiles slow down to almost a complete halt. This persists for a few seconds, and unlike Bayonetta, there's a cooldown before you can trigger your Valkyrie's ultimate evasion again. Most Valkyries pretty much have the same evasion skills, while some Valkyries have evasion skills unique only to them. You'll discover them as you play throughout the game. Ultimate evasion also does another thing, countering Quantum type. We've discussed earlier that quantum-type enemies have two states, regular and collapsed. Performing ultimate evasion and certain attacks of these enemies will make your Valkyrie enter disruption mode, which can put quantum-type enemies to their collapsed state. This adds more dynamic to the game and grants more merit into doing ultimate evasions other than surviving, and also offers all players equal footing against quantum-type enemies. As of writing the script, there are only 4 quantum-type Valkyries available, and 2 of them can only be acquired from the gacha, so it can be quite difficult for a new player to counter quantum-type enemies if disruption mode didn't exist. There are also Valkyries that doesn't have a dodge button. Instead, they have a block button. Bronya's Yamabuki armor battlesuit is a good example of this. However, this doesn't really change anything else, as successfully blocking an attack while using the Yamabuki armor will still let you enter time fracture mode. Now that we've covered the attack and dodge buttons, let's talk about the ultimate skill button. Each battlesuit has its own unique ultimate skill. It doesn't matter if the battlesuit is owned by the same character or if it is part of an awakening pair. Ultimate skills will always be different for each Valkyrie. To use your Valkyrie's ultimate skill, you need to collect SP. Each Valkyries have their own maximum SP limit and they vary from battlesuit to battlesuit. Each Valkyrie also has their own unique ways of gaining SP. Some do it when connecting combos, while some accumulate SP while not in the field. You can also gain SP by collecting orange orbs that drop from fallen enemies or when you deplete a boss's health to a certain point. Most ultimate skills also require different amount of SP to use. Most of Bronya's battlesuits have ultimate skills that only cost 50 SP to use, but when you get to her Herrscher battlesuit, she requires 125 SP to cast her oh so majestic ultimate skill. Certain weapons also offer Valkyries with an active skill that costs little to no SP. This weapon that I'm using on my Flame Sakatama Ayai Sakura battlesuit has an active skill that lets me attack one time with tremendous amount of fire damage in exchange for SP. But perhaps one of the most fun and engaging mechanics of the game is the character switch mechanic. When playing through the game, aside from co-op game modes, you can form a party of up to 3 Valkyries. The very first Valkyrie that you will be choosing and putting in the leftmost part of the party slots will be the leader, and as such will trigger her leader passive skill. While all Valkyries have different leader skills, minus the awakening pairs, they're basically the same in essence. The changes mostly revolve around what Valkyrie types they're buffing or what stats they're going to increase. Since Valkyries offer buffs for different types of Valkyries, and sometimes even specific characters, players are presented with a whole variety of party setups and synergies. Not to mention that there are certain conditions to be met to perform tag-in attacks. Tag-in attack, or better known in-game as QTE, is a special move that Valkyries can do when switching to them. This will be explained in the tutorial, but to briefly explain what QTE is, it is what happens when you switch to a Valkyrie after performing certain conditions. You know a Valkyrie can do a QTE attack when her icon in the right side of the screen is flashing really fast. These conditions vary from Valkyrie to Valkyrie, but it generally depends on inflicting a status ailment onto the enemy or entering time fracture mode. This mechanic is so much fun as it encourages players to learn different playstyles of different characters and give these characters a chance to shine and get used. Honkai Impact gates Valkyrie's level by the player's account, meaning the highest level your Valkyries can be is equal to your current account level, called commander level in-game. Increasing your commander's level is relatively easy, especially from level 1 to level 60. It will take you no time to reach it. The game also frequently gives you XP boosts that can make your commander level grind even faster, which means you can make your Valkyrie quite powerful pretty fast as well. Aside from the level of a Valkyrie, you can also upgrade their rank. Rank B battlesuits can eventually become a Rank S, and Rank S battlesuits can be upgraded into Rank SSS. This, however, is not gated by your commander level, and you can pretty much upgrade any battlesuit into its highest rank if you have the materials and resources to do so. We've also come across the term Stigma multiple times earlier in this video. Basically, Stigmas are what accessories are to other games. They give you further stat boosts, and some Stigmas offer set bonuses if you equip 2 or more Stigmas of the same set. This gives the player a more dynamic modular character customization, as most Stigma that exist in the game offer different buffs and set bonuses to your Valkyries. And so we transition to perhaps the most important part of this review, the Gacha System. Of course, this is a gacha game. What else did you expect? And generally with gacha games, we're mostly only concerned with two things. Is the gacha rate fair, and are the gacha currency easy to get? The short answer to that is there's no short answer. Gacha in Honkai Impact is called supply in-game. As usual, you are guaranteed to get a rare item within 10 pulls. If you're confused by what I meant by that, check out my tips videos about Genshin Impact. The second tip in that video talks about the gacha system of the game, and it's pretty much identical to Honkai Impact. The game also has a PT system where the game is forced to give you an ultra rare item after a certain number of pulls. In Honkai Impact's case, the game is forced to give you a rank S battlesuit or a 5-star weapon depending on which supply you're pulling after a certain number of pulls. This system is also explained in the Genshin Impact video I made, so I highly recommend you check that out. Anyways, to pull the gacha, you need to spend crystals or supply cards. Crystals are the premium currency of the game. You can pretty much use it for anything, while supply cards are like tickets which lets you pull the gacha without using crystals. You can either get the supply cards from events, various activities in the game, or exchange from other currencies. We'll come back to this later in the video. Supply is split into 4 categories: dorm supply, event supply, expansion supply, and focus supply. Dorm supply is your standard gacha banner like in any other gacha games. And as you all may know, standard banners contain a lot of items in its gacha pool, and it's no different here in Honkai Impact. You will get a random rank S battlesuit in this supply after 100 pulls. You can also get weapons on a separate category inside the dorm supply that has the same principle. It is not recommended to spend any crystals here, not only because the gacha pool is large, but also because the game gives you free dorm supply cards every now and then, which you can use to pull from the dorm supply. Event supply, on the other hand, contains various types of items depending on the event. While I was writing the initial draft of this script, the Neon Genesis Evangelion collab event was still ongoing. So the banners for the event character, Asuka, and her weapons and stigmas are inside the event banners, each having their own separate pull counters. And during the recording of the footage for this video, the event already ended and was replaced by another one, which you're currently seeing right now on the screen. Expansion supply lets you get a featured character after 100 pulls. Unlike dorm supply, where you will get a random rank S battlesuit after 100 pulls, expansion supply will always give you the featured battlesuit. This supply also comes with other specific rank A battlesuits that you can get within 10 pulls. Meanwhile, focus supply is the same as expansion supply, but it's for featured weapons and stigma sets instead. Sometimes miHoYo will run this event called Expa and Focus Select, which are basically just expansion supply and focus supply, but you can get to choose your desired feature character and their corresponding bundle of rank A battlesuits. Focus Select is just focus supply, but has the same mechanics as Expa Select. If you want to know more about this, consider following the game's official Facebook page or official Twitter account, which I will be linking down in the description. The one thing that I've seen as unique with Honkai Impact's gacha system is that it gives you 2 items per pull as opposed to just 1. I'm not sure if I already encountered a gacha game that does the same thing. I might be just forgetting something. Anyways, the gacha doesn't only contain weapons or battlesuits. They also contain materials that ranges from basic ones like common materials and level up materials to things like character fragments and materials that you can only acquire at a much higher commander level. It's both a positive and a negative depending on how you view it. I personally like it since if I'm not getting the character or weapon that I want, the game might as well give me materials that I can use to enhance my other characters. Gacha rates aren't that bad as well. The chance of getting a rank S battlesuit is 1.50%, significantly way higher than other gacha games out there. And since the gacha can give you some character fragments from time to time, you can eventually collect enough of them to unlock other characters. Of course, the highest rank of the battlesuit that you can get fragments of from the gacha is rank A. So now you might be thinking, okay, sure, Kind of a weird and complicated gacha system. Whatever. What about the gacha currency? You get a good amount of crystals from just playing the story chapters, and starting players actually get some bonuses on some gacha currencies. But obviously, these are only one-time sources of crystals, so we're going to skip past those and talk about sustainable crystal sources. You can get 50 crystals twice a week from the daily login bonus, and you get a total of 40 crystals from doing a certain number of daily tasks. So in a total of a week, you get roughly 260 crystals from these two. You can also get crystals from doing the Abyss and Memorial Arena. However, these two can be a video of their own, so I won't further explain them here. But what you need to know is that you can get crystals from the Abyss once every 2 days, and the amount of crystals that you can get depends on how well you did on that game mode and what type of Abyss you have played. Meanwhile, you can get crystals from the Memorial Arena once a week. These two can only be accessed once you reach a certain commander level though, so you might be stuck with the daily and weekly crystal rewards while you play the game for the first few weeks. Adding all the crystals that you get from the sources, you get roughly around 300 to 600 crystals a week, depending on how far you have already progressed through the game and how well you're doing in the Abyss. It's not bad, but it's significantly lower than Genshin Impact's in terms of how many days you need to wait to earn enough crystals to pull the gacha. You can pull the gacha in Genshin Impact every 3 days just from the daily commissions, while you need to wait an entire week here in Honkai Impact to do the same thing. But if you can perform well in the game modes that reward crystals, I'd say Honkai Impact gives a lot more crystals over Genshin Impact. So in short, Honkai Impact is pretty okay when it comes to giving out crystals. Honkai Impact 3, as much as I begin to love the game ever since I started playing it again, is far from perfect. No game is. If there's this one perfect game with no flaws whatsoever, there'd be no point to be excited for new releases. So what are some of the problems that are really apparent with Honkai Impact? Well, to start things off, just being a gacha game is already a problem. Now, don't get me wrong, I love gacha games as much as the next gambling addict down the street. I have spent some money on a couple of them already. I've tried a lot of gacha games as well, just trying to quench the thirst for dopamine. But let's not just brush it off as something fine. Sure, it's a free-to-play game, and no one's really forcing you to spend money on it. But at the end of the day, it's still gambling, or loot boxes if you prefer that term instead. It's exchanging various types of currencies into virtual equipment that you can only ever use inside the game. Also remember when I said that the switch character mechanics and leader passive bonus is a pretty nice feature? While it is indeed a nice feature, the problem there is that you are just mostly going to be using 1 or 2 Valkyries in your general playthrough once you collect so many of them. Keyword: power creep. Most of the rank B battle suits of Valkyries here are borderline useless. Even some of their rank A battle suits become useless once you get other Valkyries with much more versatile movesets and skills. The character switch mechanic was a charm when the game first came out, but now that the game has more than 50 characters that you can choose from, you just can't use them all. Memorial Arena locks your Valkyries to a certain boss once you fight it, but you usually only use 3 Valkyries for it. Once you've invested on your Valkyries, you will never find yourself using more than 15 out of the 50 that are available in the game. When I said different characters earlier in the combat segment, this is what I meant. Just 15 different characters. Now, of course, me saying that you're only going to use 15 battle suits is mostly hyperbole, and it may also be subjective. Perhaps there are people that do use the rank B battle suits. Okay, I agree. Not all people will have the same opinion about these characters all the time. There's not one unified voice that says, haha, yeah, White Comet sucks, dude. I'm sure that if you scour the internet, you will find someone who actually enjoys using White Comet. And who am I to judge? But you can't deny that power creeping definitely exists in this game, as with all other games too. Now that I think about it, I think this issue is pretty much inevitable for online games that get updates regularly, so this whole thing was pointless and I just made this video longer than I necessarily wanted. Anyways, another thing that I want to point out is that the game has a lot of outdated tutorials and user interface. you can actually see the point of when the game has improved its UI through the story chapters. Nothing really harmful, but I just find it really strange that they're changing the way they present dialogues in the later chapters, but leave the open world dialogue boxes untouched. Don't fix what ain't broken, I guess. For this next point, I'll talk about the PC port. While I'm grateful for miHoYo that they decided to make an official PC port for this game, since I don't really like playing games like this on my phone for many reasons that will make this video incredibly long if I list them out, I'd like to point out a couple of problems with it. The most prominent problem about the PC port is that it has some infinite download bugs in it. The game will ask you to download CG assets, but this thing takes forever to complete because you're stuck in like 2 kilobytes per second of download. And before you say, oh, that's just your internet, get a better one. No, it isn't. A lot of people have had this problem as well, and it's not just an isolated case. When I encountered this problem, I immediately went to a speed test website to see if my internet was acting up, but no. My internet was fine. I could watch videos on YouTube in 1080p without any buffering whatsoever, but when I close and all of that and come back to the game, it's still downloading at its very slow speed. It's a real annoying issue, and it looks like miHoYo isn't planning on fixing it since it's more than a year now since people complained about it, and I just experienced it a month ago. The second problem about the PC port is that somewhere halfway through the main story, the subtitles for CG scenes just disappear. Apparently, the client is having some trouble extracting the subtitles from the RAR files, so you just don't have subtitles for the remainder of the story. Fortunately, the CG scenes are mostly short and only a handful of them have actual dialogue outside of usual anime shouts and grunts. You can actually manually extract the subtitle files, but good luck doing that as there's like a million of these things in the game files and you have to extract them one by one. If you know a way on how to do this easily, leave a comment down below. That's pretty much it for my problems in the game. I just want to say that the game always entices you into spending money since everywhere you look there are signs of microtransactions, but these things are most of the time just cosmetics or characters that you'll eventually get from the gacha or just by playing the game. And so we come to the last part of this annoyingly long video. What's the final verdict? I think the game is good. People can obviously point out more obvious flaws in the game that I haven't touched upon because maybe I haven't experienced it yet. I've only been playing the game for just a total of, 3 months? Maybe there are even more glaring issues that the developers still aren't fixing yet after all these years. And if you do know some issues that are absolutely present in the game that I failed to mention, feel free to comment them down below so that other people that's looking for the views about this game can gain more insights and can better decide if the positives of the game outweighs its negatives and whatnot. Personally, I really enjoyed the game. I'm really hooked into the story, the gameplay loop feels nice, the characters are really lovable, beautiful cinematic cutscenes, and awesome soundtracks. The story is pretty convoluted like I said earlier, but it isn't really anything deep or mind-provoking. Once you get a grasp of what's happening, it's actually pretty easy to follow. I don't care that much about the gacha since I'm more of a wanted character because they look cool or cute kind of guy, rather than getting them because they're overpowered or they're going to be the next meta or something. So while the gacha is also kind of a bummer compared to the likes of Azure lane, I really don't mind it. I still hate how uninformative the wiki sites are when it comes to current events and game modes, which made writing the script so much harder than it should have been. And I think this is a huge drawback for new players as well, which makes the game so much unfriendly towards new players. Lastly, I'm bored as hell. I don't have the money to buy games on Steam, and even if I do, my computer can't run most of the games that I want to play. So I'll just settle with this free-to-play game that further reminds me of the fact that I have no money to spend on anything, and that I'm stuck being a free-to-play player in gacha games even if I wanted to spend money on their gacha to alleviate my gambling addiction. Hey everyone, thank you so much for sticking by. This was kind of a long video and I hope I didn't bore the shit out of you. I hope the timestamps I put helped you while watching this video. I might also make an overview of the game's version 4.6, so if you like the sound of that, then consider subscribing so you'll know once the video comes out. Anyways, I want to thank you all so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like. I really enjoyed editing this video and I'm really proud of it. Again, if you want more videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel as well. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you so much once again, and I'll see you in the next video.